Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and we just finished the first parak, Daf Chaf Bed Amud Aleph, at the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zechud Rufah Shel Ma for Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, Daniel, Moshe ben Farangis Avraham, Binyamin Bat Rina, Kela Bat Nazi, Sigalit Bat Yafa, Levi Halevi ben Leah, Malkahana, Bat Salha Sipora, that should all have Refuah Shelema Be'ezat Hashem. Amen. Someone's also dedicated Leilui Nishmat, Rav Ezra David ben Rav Naftali Halevi Neuberger Alav Shalom, that just passed away. Unfortunately, at the young age of 68. A few days ago, someone that I was very close with, someone that I adored tremendously. Should have his neshama, should have an aliyah, and also for one of our own chevra's family members that just passed away, also Mrs. Shaheen Esther Bat Yehuda, that her neshama should have an aliyah be'ezat Hashem. Amen. Okay, so we have a promise to fulfill. The promise was we're going to go back and pick up some of the rate that we left on the table, and one of the probably more obvious questions that we left unresolved is the question that every one of us perhaps has had at some point in our experience. Why is it that we have 2 days of Yom Kippur as Yom Tov Sheni, but we have it. We have it in theory as a Yom Tov Sheni, but we don't keep 2 days of Yom Kippur. We have 2 days Rosh Hashanah, we have 2 days Sukkot, we have 2 days Pesach, we have 2 days Shemini Atzeret, 2 days Shavuot, but not 2 days of Yom Kippur. And if you really pay attention, it should be worse than Shemini Atzeret, because it's, and Sukkot, certainly Shemini Atzeret, because the shlichim of Eretz Yisrael would go out to tell people when the Kiddush HaChodesh was, and sometimes they get to places, sometimes they don't get to places. Now, on Rosh Hashanah, everyone keeps, in Eretz Yisrael, they keep 2 days, even though that they had a knowledge of Rosh Chodesh Elul from before. But the doubt is there, all across the Yamim Tovim. All across the Yamim Tovim, the doubt is there. So therefore, why is it that we keep 2 days of all the Yamim Tovim, but we don't keep 2 days of Yom Kippur? Everyone has had this question, either conscious or subconscious level. Why is Yom Kippur different? Now, the Kreti Upeleti is Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz, his work on Yoreh De'ah is called Kreti Upeleti, right? He asks this question from the Yerushalmi. He says the Yerushalmi already asks this question. Yerushalmi already brings the question of why we don't have 2 days of Yom Kippur, and Yerushalmi answers. Now, Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz, the Kreti, he has a serious question on the answer of the Yerushalmi, and he says his own answer based on something amazing that we learned, and we're going to now focus on a little bit more. Now, this question is a massive sugya in Masachet Ketuvot, Daf Tet, of when you have Safek Deoraita, is Safek Deoraita lechumra or lekula? What do we say? When you have doubt in a biblical concept, what's the halacha? We say it's the chumra, right? Now, is that a Torah concept or is that a rabbinic concept? The way we would say it in yeshiva is Safek Deoraita mideoraita lechumra, or is it only midrabanan lechumra, right? In other words, before any rabbinic decree, if you would have a doubt in a concept of Torah would you be able to be lenient? Now Rambam holds that Safek Deoraita is only Midarabanan Lechumra. Midoraita, Safek Deoraita is Lekula. You could be lenient on a Deoraita level. Now, why is this a big deal? Because this is the Rambam in Chotum Admit. Now, there is a concept of Safek Sfeka, a compounded doubt, a double doubt. And Safek Sfeka, when you have two doubts like that, which is a very complex sugya, we don't suggest, the Shach writes, no one in Siman Kuf Yud, the Shach writes, no one should be making their own Safek Sfeka. He says nowadays, even the Chachamim cannot make Safek Sfeka, it's so complicated, right? But a Safek Sfeka, a double doubt, a compounded doubt, you could be Mekel. Even if it's a Deoraita concept, you can still be Mekel. How does Safek Sfeka work? If I am Machmir by a regular Safek Deoraita, why is it that I could be Mekel when you have two doubts? How does it work? So according to Rambam, the way it comes out is because one Safek Midoraita, you could be Mekel on a Deoraita level. If you have doubt, if this thing is Asur or Mutar Midoraita, if you have doubt, it's not for sure. On Deoraita level, Safek Deoraita is the Kula. Chachamim came along and said, you cannot do that. You can't do it. So therefore, Midrabanan, you have to be Machmir. But what's the halacha of Safek Derabanan? We have a doubt in the Derabanan, Safek Derabanan, Lekula. So if I have two doubts, so how does it work? The first doubt makes the Deoraita a Derabanan, because only with Derabanan you have to be Machmir now. So if I have another Safek on top of that, now it's a Safek on a Derabanan. Safek Derabanan, Lekula. Right? This is how the Rambam understands it. The Rashba understands it differently. The Rashba holds, no. Safek Deoraita, you have to be Machmir on a Deoraita level. No, nothing doing. So why does Safek Sfeka work? Why does a double doubt work? Says the Rashba, I'll tell you why. Because it's a concept of Rov. Concept of Rov. How does it work? Because the first Safek makes it a 50-50. Right? 50-50. If it's a legitimate Safek, 50-50. If you have another Safek on top of that, then even the 50% chance that this would be Asur, now it's a Safek. So it becomes 75-25. And 75-25, you are allowed now to be Mekel because Acharei Rabim Latot, you could follow the Rov. That's how it works. Now this is not even scratching the surface of a super simplified, encapsulated way of saying this. This is a massive, deep and wide and fantastic discussion, okay? You could write books on this. But we do what we do, and we scratch the surface as we always do. So that's what Rambam says. Rabbi Yonasan Eibshis, this concept that me and you don't fast a second day on Yom Kippur is a fantastic raya to the Rambam's Shita, right? It's a fantastic raya to the Rambam's Shita because Safek Deoraita of whether or not today would be Yom Kippur, the second day, Sfeka de Yoma, we call it, right? Sfeka de Yoma is Mideoraita le Kula, according to Rambam. So do I have to fast the second day Mideoraita? No. Only Midrabanan you have to take Yom Tov Sheni. And when you have to do it with Rabbanan, you could say Rabbanan did not make a gezerah on this one Yom Tov because it's a gezerah. I think Rabbi Eliyahu said this when we asked this originally. It's a gezerah, remember? Gezerah she'en rov hatzibur yecholim la'amod bu. What was my question to you when you said that? I was like, wait a second. It's midoraita, right? So says Rabbi Yonatan says, no, it's not, because it's feka deoraita, mid deoraita lekula. If you have a doubt on a Torah level, it will be lekula. Only Chachamim made the gezerah that you have to do it. By all of the Yamim Tovim, they made such a gezerah. But when it came to Yom Kippur, it's a gezerah she'ein rov hasibur yecholim la'amod ba, and therefore they didn't do it. Okay? Now, I want to pose a question to this. It's a question that Minchat Chinuch asks, not on this, but Minchat Chinuch asks this question stam on a Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, right? Kleenex. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya b'dvaro. The Gemara says, we just did this, so it's Geshmak, right? Gemara Daf Mem Vav Amud Bet, Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Gemara talks about Shmini Atzeret sitting in the Sukkah, right? It's Machloket Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, right? Everyone's nodding their head, they remember it clearly, Baruch Hashem, right? It's amazing. So, what was the Machloket there? Do you have to sit in the Sukkah, do you have to say Bracha? And the Gemara says, Kula Alma, it's Machloket. The Gemara says, Kula Alma lo pligi. No one disagrees. The Beruchi lo mevarchinan. That's one side of the Machloket. That everybody agrees that you don't make bracha of l'shem basukah. By the way, the Machloket and the halacha is set. The Gemara goes through a whole process of Machloket, and at the end of the Gemara's maskara, which is the halacha Shulchan Aruch, is Yetuvi Yatminan Beruchi Lo Mevarchinan. Right? We sit in the sukkah, we don't make bracha. That's the maskara, right? So don't let my dazzling of the sugya confuse your halachic mind, right? That's the halacha, the bottom line. But earlier on in the Gemara says maybe machloket Rav and Rabbi Yochanan is, it's not machloket on saying the bracha. Everyone agrees that you don't make bracha. Pashut. The machloket is, Rav holds you sit in the sukkah. Rabbi Yochanan holds you don't even sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeret. Right? Now, let me read you a Rambam here for just a moment. Writes the Rambam in Halachot of Kiddush HaChodesh, Perek Hei Halacha Hei. Ume'emata yitchilu kol Yisrael lachashov v'cheshbon zeh. When he talks about the cheshbon of calendar, the way we have it, says Rambam, when did we start switching to the calendar from Al Pi Re'iyah, the way the Torah commands that it should be Al Pi Re'iyah, based on Edim and the whole process that we've been discussing? Says Rambam, Me'mata yitchilu kol Yisrael lachashov v'cheshbon zeh, misof chachmei HaGemara, the end of the Gemara time. Chachmei HaGemara. Misof chachmei HaGemara, ba'et shcharva Eretz Yisrael, when Eretz Yisrael became completely desolate, that's when they started. Velo nishar sham betin kavua, they had no betin kavua. This is way after the Churban, like way after the Churban. But says the Rambam, aval bimei chachmei Mishnah, in the time of the Tanaim, v'chen bimei chachmei HaGemara, and also in the time of the Amoraim, ad yemei Abaye v'Rava, until the generation of Abaye v'Rava, they used to do al kviat Eretz Yisrael hayu somchin. They would rely on the kviat HaChodesh, Rosh Chodesh of Eretz Yisrael, and they had messengers and all the system that we learned. Azoi zok the Rambam. That's what Rambam says. Where was Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan is the Talmud of Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rav is the Talmud of Rebbe. This is the very first generation of Amoraim. Right? To the degree that Gemara says Rav Tanahu Upalig. Rav is like literally the gray area between Tanaim and Amoraim. If you need to, we say Rav could take on a Tana, because he is really a Tana. So this is Mamash, the first generation of Tanaim, of Amoraim. So in the time of Rabbi Yochanan and Rav, were they doing Kiddush HaChodesh based on calendar or based on witnesses? Witnesses. So therefore, this safek of what day it actually is, they didn't have the calendar and say, oh, really, the first day, the Yom Tov is the Ikar. They didn't have that. They're doing it the good old way of sending shluchim, and they have the same sfeik adiyoma that they had always. And yet, you have a Gemara that black on white says that Rabbi Yochanan held you don't even sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeret. Why not? Everybody knows that sleeping for 5 minutes outside the sukkah is asur, right? Everyone knows that. It's worse than eating. How can you sleep on Shmini Atzeret, a nice Yom Tov nap, outside the sukkah? How can you eat outside the sukkah? It's Fikah Diyoma. Now, what we said, right, 5 minutes ago, does it help in this case? It's not an aguna that you have to find the kula for. By Yom Kippur, we said this whole cheshbon of Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz that says, okay, it makes sense according to Rambam. The whole second day is the Rabbanan. Safek the Rabbanan really would be, Safek the Oraita would be really mideoraita lekula. Midrabbanan is the chumrah. Chazal didn't want to endanger people. Gezerah she'en rov hasivur yecholim la'amod bo. Chazaku baruch. Is sitting in the sukkah gezerah she'en rov hasivur yecholim la'amod bo? You see a problem over here? How in the world do you have Rabbi Yochanan saying that you don't even sit in the sukkah on the second day? Fair enough? This is fair enough, right? So I want to share with you a second answer, which really is brought in the Ritba. The Rishonim already discussed this, and Shagadari writes this in his Sefer to Evan as well. He does not bring the Ritba, but it's really a Ritba. I mean, he didn't have the Ritba. It's fascinating to know that many of the Achronim did have many of the major names of the Rishonim in print. Right, Ritva they had a little bit, whatever it was mentioned in Shita Mekubetzet they had, but the fantastic set of Ritva that we have, it's only 100 plus years that we found the Kitvei Yad and it was actually printed. So when we talk about the Shagdarye was the time of the Vila Gaon, right? It's actually very interesting. Once we mentioned Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, Shagdarye was the first Rebbe of Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner, before he became a student of Vila Gaon. I always say, like, the two Rebbe, if you have two Rebbes like that, you know, the Vila Gaon and Shagdarye are the two Gdolei Achronim, the Ashkenazi communities that felt comfortable disagreeing with Rishonim even, right? They say about Shagdarye, he finished Shas 1,000 times. 1,000 times. When he was on his deathbed, he was an old man already, like, you know, and he's going through, he has his shamash, he's handing him Gemara, he's finishing one Gemara after another, every few minutes he's finishing another Gemara. So one of the Talmidim say, you know, give him a siddur with vidui and this, whatever, you know, you never know. That's, you know, the end is approaching. So it's fine. So give him a siddur, he got so upset. He says, I never had time to do Avera. Like, I was learning my whole, can you imagine a person saying such a thing? Right? He got upset. He said, "Why we bitul Torah? I'm learning. Like, you know, you give me a siddur for what? You know." So Shagdari actually asks and answers this question in Tur Evan. So I want to share with you the answer. The answer is based on we really should be able to say the answer ourselves because we learned the Gemara ourselves. You remember, Mimei Ezra ve'ad ata. The Gemara said, "Lo matzinu." Help me out. Elul meubar. You remember that? The reason that they relied on Yom Kippur beforehand, you remember, Levi came and said, "Oh, kama besima tafshila de bavlai b'yom araba de ma'arava." Remember that? On top of the Amud, he said, "How good smelling is the food of the Babylonians on Yom Kippur of Eretz Yisrael?" Because that was 1 year. It happened very seldomly. From time of Ezra, that they made Elul Meubar, and hence the things are pushed back one day, and Yom Kippur ended up being on what the Babylonians were counting as Yud Aleph Betishrei, actually was Yud Betishrei. Right? That's what Levi says, it's Yom Kippur today. And they had just opened their fast, and he's like, wow, what a shish kebab on Yom Kippur, right? But that was an anomaly. So we mentioned before that they used to send shluchim on Elul because they wanted people to know when Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is, lest the shluchim of Tishrei don't get there on time. And we mentioned because the vast majority of the years, Elul would not be meubar, right? From the time of Ezra until the time of the Gemara, lo matzidu Elul meubar. We never find Elul being meubar, which means very seldomly, right? Very seldomly. So says the Shagad Aryeh, says the Ritzbah, as again, there's a whole lot more over here, but says the Shagad Aryeh, that's what they were relying on. Because there's a concept, you remember how we mentioned the Rashba says Safek Sfeka works mitam rov, right? Rashba holds that the double doubt operates under the umbrella of majority. Because one Safek makes it 50-50, and second Safek makes it 75-25, right? And now you're allowed to follow after the rov because Acharei Rabim Le'atot, right? So says the Shagad Aryeh, if I could follow the Rov, so halachically speaking, if the vast majority of years Elul is not meubar, all I need to do is if Elul was meubar. If Elul was not meubar, so I know the 30th day of Elul was Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, and 10 days later is, the 10th day is Yom Kippur. I'm good to go. Am I allowed to rely on it? Says the Shagad Aryeh, yes, you are. On a Doraita level, you're allowed to rely on Rov. Now, therefore, right, if you have any good reason, now this is me talking, if you have any good reason for why you don't want to be machmir, like the chumrah of Yom Tov Sheni, which is minag avotehem b'yedehem, well, even the time that they did Al Pi Re'iyah, that was not just minag avotehem, but it is a chumrah that you do. And when it comes to Tishrei, the Chodesh Tishrei is not a regular Safek. In Nisan, you have a real serious Safek, right? And Shavuot, but when it comes to Sivan, you have a real Safek. But once it gets to Tishrei, the real Safek is not as real, because Al Pi Rov, we already know the Ariko Paskin when Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is, because Lo Matzinu Elul Meubar. Anybody with me? Everyone is with me. Good, right? So therefore, back to our question. A, Yom Kippur. Do you have to fast 2 days of Yom Kippur? Again, we mentioned that there were those who did it. Rava did it. I'm just going to read to you a Ramah in just a moment. But Yom Kippur would be dangerous for people to therefore, there was no takara. Why? Because the safek on Yom Kippur is not really a big safek. We know Al Pi Rov what the Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is, and we know what the Yom Kippur is, right? And with the same token, when it comes to Shmini Atzeret, right, which is an inherent stira, right? It's an inherent stira. You could celebrate Yom Tov Sheni as much as you want, right? We do it by Sukkot, the first half of Sukkot, right? It's a Shehyaru, all that. But when it comes to Shmini Atzeret, celebrating Sukkah in Shmini Atzeret is disrespectful for Shmini Atzeret. If it's Shmini Atzeret, it's not Sukkah. If it's Sukkah, it's not Shmini Atzeret. It can't go together. So therefore, you can understand why Chazal said, it's not the halacha, but why there's a legitimate shita of Rabbi Yochanan says, don't even sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeret. Why? Because now there's safek. The Chodesh Tishrei, out of all the other Chodashim, is the one Chodesh that we know based on Rov, when we could paskin based on Rov, when the Rosh Chodesh was, and you don't need to come to Sfeika de Yoma. So, whereas we do still Sfeika de Yoma, it's a very quasi Sfeika de Yoma. So if you have any legitimate reason to say, I don't want to celebrate Sfeika de Yoma, second Yom Tov, we will do it. One could be for danger, for people fasting a second Yom Kippur, knocked down, And even if it is for Shmini Atzeret, that it's going to be kind of disrespectful to sit in the sukkah in Shmini Atzeret, we will knock that out as well. So as we mentioned before, obviously that's not the halacha. The halacha of the Gemara is Yetuvi Yatminan. We still sit Beruchi Lo Mevarchinan. And the reason we don't say the bracha is that very thing that is disrespectful to say L'Shem Basukah when it's Shmini Atzeret. That's why we don't say the bracha, by the way, right? So that answer of the Ritba, the answer of the Shagat Aryeh, the Milchat Chinuch, so in Mitzvah Shin Aleph, all of that comes together to have two fantastic answers to this question. And if I want to read you one more piece over here, and really in Sheiltot Rabachai, in Sheilta Memvav also, and Meiri in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, this is mentioned, this Ritba, this same Ritba, which is in our Masechta, but a little earlier on, in Daf Yud Chet, is mentioned in Sheiltot Rabachai and also in the Meiri as well. But Lemaaseh, some people in the course of the years, they had the chumrah of fasting a second day, right? We had this already in Rava. Rava used to fast every year Yom Kippur twice, which I'm going to get back to in just a moment. And the Rama writes in Siman Tafresh Chaf Dalet in Seif Hey, she'en linhog bechumrazu mishum deyesh lachashosh shavo lidei sakana. Rama says, don't do it. He actually brings this, that some to do it. He says, don't do it because a person could come to sakana, and the Mishnah Berurah explains this. The Chavetz Chaim says, really, Medina, you don't have to do it, but Mishnah Berurah only writes because nowadays we are beki'im bekiviyah de'archa. What we're saying is, the Chavetz Chaim, that it's not only nowadays that we are baki be calendar, but even in the time of Rabbi Yochanan, even in time of the Gdolei Tanaim v'Amoraim, when he came to Tishrei, says the Ritba, it was not really a suffix because you could go after Rov. Now, one nugget, okay, this is Geshmak. The Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai says something fantastic. It says, Rava, in our Gemara is the figure that would fast every Yom Kippur 2 days, 48 hours, right? We spoke about Shankai and Rabbi Michal Tokachinsky versus the Chazon Ish, right? We spoke about this. Says the Ben Ish Chai, out of all the Amoraim, the one Amora that I wouldn't expect to fast twice would be Rava. Why? He says, look at Masechet Tanit. Look at Masechet Tanit on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Ben. There the Gemara says, there was a fellow, was a doctor, right? Abba Umana, that he would get a Shalom Aleichem every morning, mi yeshiva shel mala, right? Mi metifta d'rekia. Every morning he got an official Shalom Aleichem from the yeshiva of heavens from HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly. Can you imagine? A doctor, right? Abaye would get Shalom Aleichem every Erev Shabbat, every week, once a week, right? And Rava, even though halacha is like Rava, all over Shas, Rava Abaye halacha is like Rava, aside from 6 exceptions, Yal Kagam, Rava would get it only once a year, a mala the Yom Kippuri, every Yom Kippur. And he had Chalishu Dadat. He was upset that he was not getting as much as Abaye. Abaye was upset that he was not getting as much as Abba Umana, this doctor. They told him, see, you can't do what Abba Umar does. And what he did was, Shmirat Einayim. Okay, Rabotai? What he did was, when he had to examine women, he had a garb that would cover everything, and it was local, whatever it is that he was working. And it was about tzedakah. And Talmid Chachamim, he would even give them money instead of charging. It was a tremendous thing. Gemara talks about the emotional inadequacy that Abaye felt compared to him, and Rabba felt compared to Abaye, right? So says the Ben Yoyada, says the Ben Ish Chai, forget about the drama of this story. Rava, out of everyone, should have known when Yom Kippur is, because every Yom Kippur he would get a Shalom Aleichem from Yeshiva Shel Mala. So what was the safek for Rava when Yom Kippur is? Right? It's a fascinating question. So, well, I have my way of answering this, but we're out of time, so I'll just tell you what the Ben Ish Chai says. Ben Ish Chai says it's fakert, is exactly the opposite. He says he used to fast. He used to fast 2 days, Yom Kippur, until he started being zoche to get a Shalom Aleichem on Erev Yom Kippur, and that's when he stopped fasting on Erev Yom Kippur, because that's originally he used to do it 2 days. Who knows? Maybe in the zchut of the tremendous chuyot that he had, Hashem felt bad that he's fasting, he's endangering his life. Start giving him a Shalom Aleichem Erev Yom Kippur. Out of all the days of the year, Erev Yom Kippur will be maybe the worst time because you're full of averot, so to speak, right? Is the day before reset, right? Every year you have a reset button. The day before reset, that's the day you get Shalom Aleichem. So Ben Chai says that the reason he got the Shalom Aleichem was it's a kiss on the forehead from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, this is, I'm telling you when Yom Kippur is, you don't have to fast 2 days. So that's how he sees it. I had an insight to answer this question a little bit differently than the Ben Ish Chai will, but Bezat Hashem discuss that in a different time. Chazak u'baruch.